You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Wellborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Power Athlete Radio listeners, today we're taking a deep dive on hormones and testosterone replacement as a vehicle for living a long, productive life. We have Wellcore CEO Jason Whitson and head clinician Ryan Lester on the podcast to discuss their unique process for sample collection and how they're bringing some much-needed legitimacy to the Wild West world of female and male hormones. With the goal of at-home hormone optimization, they're looking to make it a simple and painless process that any and everyone should be looking into. Buckle up for Team Wellcore.
Dude, I'm excited to talk a little bit about what you guys do at Wellcore, and more importantly, kind of understand this TRT game, because as I was going through the internet, it's like the fucking Wild West. Oh, yeah. Like, I'm looking at these pages that I'm not sure what they're selling, if they're selling G-strings, if they're selling like lap dances, testosterone, then you can also get meal. I mean, it is for something that is prescribed and should be, like have a little bit of intrinsic knowledge, or at least a doctor prescribe it. Like my head is blown. I didn't realize that this market is like this, like Wild West is the only word I can give it for.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an accurate descriptor, but what's even more scary is before Wellcore came along, the clinician that I was working with starting in like 2005 up until I met the team that became the Wellcore team, horrible protocol. They probably did like a weekend seminar on hormone replacement therapy, and I roll in there and they're like, just do this once a week, this amount. And it worked well, but like in the long term, it wouldn't have been a healthy outcome.
Yeah.
It wasn't dialed. It wasn't personalized for me at all. I don't think they looked at my blood, but every other year, which is just way off.
Yeah.
So yeah, we agreed that it was the Wild West, and it was part of why we wanted to do it the right way.
My own experience with this is kind of weird in that my dad, who passed away a couple of years ago, he went in to see his doctor, got his blood work done, had low T. So what did the doctor prescribe him? Testosterone cream. So it gives him his testosterone cream. He comes home, he's taking it, and all of a sudden, probably about 6 months later, he had a TIA, like a little mini stroke. And they took him in, they call us, my brothers and I, we're living in Orange County, drive up to LA. And, we go into the hospital, your father had a stroke, he's dead. And he kind of wakes up, and they were like, can't believe it. Even the nurse was like, I've never seen him bleed this bad with anybody ever wake up, and he wakes up. So then we get all this testing. We can't find anything. Happens like 3 or 4 more times. And so finally, I got kind of frustrated with the doctors, kept asking questions. I took him out to Arizona to go see my doc, and got Tom Inclin on Cosenta. And so we start going through all the blood work and everything. The first question he asks is like, you take any medications? And he kind of takes his breath and he goes, yeah, I'm taking this testosterone cream. And I looked at him. I was like, when did you start taking this? And he tells me, well, he's like, I was kind of embarrassed and didn't tell anybody and didn't tell me. And so then we looked at his blood work, and he had 0 testosterone in his body, but his estrogen was through the roof. So all of that testosterone he'd been taking had been aromatizing to estrogen. The guy that gave it to him had never brought him back to retest him. And then all of a sudden his estrogen's through the roof, blood gets thick and clotting, and now that's where the substance, or where his TIAs came from.
Right.
So, and then all of a sudden, we finally get that all figured out. 3 months, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 6 to 9 months later, liver, stomach cancer. He was gone 2 months later. So it was kind of I think it was like the like picking the onion, that effect. But I mean, the guy, complete, lack of protocol. Prescribed something, never even brought him back to even test him again to see if the testosterone was doing anything. And if he had looked at it and been like, well, you're taking it, you don't have any testosterone in your body, this could be a problem. And then when I talked to the docs, I'm like, hey, all this is aromatizing. You think about giving him any anti-estrogens, nothing? They're like, no, we can't prescribe that. I'm like, but you can prescribe this shit. And then what if it's not in there? I mean, the body fat was too high. He was sedentary. Blood sugar was kind of a mess. I mean, all of these things contributed to the aromatization process for estrogen, and had no testosterone in his body. And so I think that was what kind of the first piece in this puzzle. I mean, obviously the cancer killed him,
right? But
that was the first thing. He was relatively healthy up until this moment.
So a half-ass protocol with a clinician that probably hasn't had the proper training.
Yeah. Same guy who also diagnosed him with an ulcer and bronchitis because the cirrhosis from his liver from the tumor was pumping out so much fluid into his lungs. They thought it was bronchitis, and then he was having stomach issues, obviously from the tumor, and they thought it was a ulcer. All they would have had to do was snake a camera down his throat, and they would have found it.
Right.
So for months, he's going and complaining of this. Oh yeah, you're fine. And I'm like, and what's wild is there's no recourse because standard of care.
Right.
And he was following standard of care.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Power Athlete delivers battle-tested performance programming for every kind of athlete. So do you want to go from average Joe to MVP? Then dominate with Field Strong. Get stacked and jacked with Jack Street. Hustle in life and still build muscle with Grindstone. Fear no opponent with Dragon Slayer. Be harder than coffin nails with Hammer. Max out minimal equipment with Lean Enable. Or unlock those newbie gains with Bedrock. Get over to powerathletehq.com/training and choose your 7-day free trial right here, right now. Get lifting, get training, get in shape, all while listening to the rest of this show.
And sadly, I feel like I hear just from my own family tons of stories like that where you go in and see the doctor, they hear about a symptom and they're like, there was a drug rep in here talking about that symptom and they've got a solution. So I'm going to give you this thing. Get out of my office. I've got another appointment. I can't spend more than 3 to 5 minutes with
It's 3
you.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 3 minutes.
And they just move on.
Yeah.
So the lack of personalization, there's no comprehensive workup to your point. Like all they had to do was like look inside.
Yeah.
And just get a little bit more personal with them. But it just seems like the norm.
Yeah.
Which is extremely sad. I mean, I saw that all the way back to when I was a little kid. My family's not that healthy. I'm the healthiest person in my family. And I attribute a lot of that to finding the source or what would have been the source of many more problems down the road at such a young age. And it was weird how I had to find it out, but suffer an injury, sedentary, can't walk, stuck in bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you're fighting back physically, starting to walk again and do stuff like that. But then the rest of my body shuts down. That's when I sought out this, effectively someone who was supposedly specializing in hormone optimization. And they got me back up, but I didn't realize that it was going to be more than physical, depression, anxiety, just complete lack of motivation from a guy in his mid to late 20s.
Yeah,
it's not supposed to happen. But lucky for me,
it's happening more and more.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at sex hormone binding globulin levels today. I mean, I look at people with blood work in the 70s to 150s. Our grandfathers were 10 to 12. So, I mean, and all that's produced environmentally, I think. So I think a lot of these environmental toxins and a lot of the things we're dealing with within our food, within the water, within everything.
Yeah.
And you know what? I love how, the powers that be were like, well, when you look at something that says may cause cancer, it's because it did cause cancer.
Right.
And they figured that out in the 70s.
Right.
I mean, it's just like you don't see the rates at which people are getting cancer and dealing with these problems as early as they are without some form of something changing.
Right.
And if you say that, people are like, oh, it's a conspiracy. I'm like, it's not a conspiracy. It says it on the package. May cause cancer. It's because it was shown to cause cancer and they can't say definitively that it was. So they had to put the may.
Right. Yeah. I say this too much, but I feel like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat more often nowadays than in the past. For sure.
They say the difference between conspiracy theorists and like somebody that's just fact, it's about 6 months.
Right.
Just
give it time.
Well, I mean, the testosterone thing, especially in this, is I was kind of just going and doing some inside research on you guys and other people. Like I was blown away because I always thought, any type of drug like this that's controlled, like doctor's prescription, I mean, online physicians, I mean, it looks like I don't understand how these groups aren't all shut down. Like if I'm the government or maybe the government's so overwhelmed with the people that we allegedly pay tax dollars to kind of manage this whole thing. Mm-hmm. Like I'm like, how does this even look legal?
Right.
You get on the phone with somebody you don't know as a doc. How are people doing it? Compounding pharmacies. I mean, what I liked about you guys, I like the the blood collection I thought was super jiggy. So my son's type 1 diabetic. So the way that he does his CGM is almost identical. So as soon as I saw like kind of the collection deal, I was like, oh, this is super smart.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. we're really proud of that device. We obviously didn't create it, but we partnered with a company really early on in our existence because we're like, look, we want to normalize hormone optimization. We are extremely risk averse, and Brian can talk about that. Like, we don't just dole it out. None of our clinicians are compensated in any way, shape, or form for like the more prescriptions they write. And in other areas of healthcare, they are, and we don't do that. But the first hurdle that we wanted to remove was the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt about just giving blood, right? Because we've all been to a lab, we've had the needle shoved in our arm and 8 to 13 vials of blood. And then they made it worse with the finger prick.
Yeah.
Like, sure, it's convenient, but it's super painful. The dry blood spot stuff is only really usable 45 to 50% of the time. You got to retest. And lastly, the data that can be derived from a dry blood spot test just pales in comparison to whole blood.
Sure.
So we find this company and they've got a painless device, and we're no longer afraid to say painless because this stuff's been on kids and they're just like, yeah, I don't feel it.
Yeah.
It's fine. But collecting 600 microliters of blood allows us to do a rather comprehensive panel in comparison. And we've got other panels that we can employ like down the road if we need to. But yeah, we wanted to come out of the gates with what we believed was the most premium, the most personalized, the most painless service so that we could get the attention of more men and women to optimize their hormones. Because to your point earlier, it is a confluence of events and variables like exposure to plastics.
Mm-hmm.
Our food mostly sucks unless you're eating whole food, raw food.
I think I saw a statistic the other day that the average person consumes something like 3 pounds of plastic a year, just based up, like the leaching within plastic bags. And I didn't even dig it. I'm sure you guys have had this happen where you wish you didn't know what you knew. So if you ever do any of the research on leaching plastic water bottles, so those water bottles are produced and almost sit there for like, I think it's around from 18 to 24 months before they ever get to the consumer. And they heat up and this and all these different heat cycles, and those plastic bottles, which are the cheapest, just leach plastic.
Yeah.
So now I look at those and I'm kind of like, like with my kids, I won't let them drink them, and we have them in the shop on occasion. But like for the most part, I do my best to avoid those.
Yeah, I rolled in here with one, and we stopped at a gas station. I was looking for like the Richards rainwater can. They didn't have it.
Yeah, you do your best when you can.
I've taken 2 sips of this thing, but yeah, it's in my head.
And then you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I'm drinking in all this plastic. And then you look at all the BPA stuff. I mean, it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in an interesting time where, like the level of pollution, people are constantly complaining, is it going to be weather? Is it, all of a sudden climate change? Is it nuclear weather? I'm like, we're probably going to kill ourselves.
Right.
I mean, if anything, there's a great book by Shanna Swan, who wrote A Countdown.
Okay.
Which really, if you guys were really into this stuff, go into it. I've been trying to get her on the podcast. She was on Joe Rogan, and she wrote an incredible book. Men today in their 20s are like 1/10 as fertile as like their grandfathers were. I mean, just the fertility rates. And she went back and looked at fertility rates for sperm banks over 50 years. And the numbers are like frightening, staggering.
Right.
Like the fact that like if this continues on a trend, we're pretty much endangered species now as humans.
Yeah. Because
our birth rate is under 2. So 2 people hook up, they need at least 2.1 to continue, or it's actually 3 to continue, and we're under that. So, we're technically an endangered species now.
I also believe that one of the other variables is how easy our lives have become. I mean, obviously talking about, people with jobs and the means, and mostly in the United States, but we're air conditioned everywhere we go, including this old horse barn.
Well, actually, you're only like the second or third podcast we've ever had AC on.
Okay.
Because Jacob figured out a way to trim out the AC. So we used to just sit in here and sweat. And it was about 90 minutes you could sit in here, especially when it was like 107 out day. Right. So it'd get pretty hot. So now Jacob's like, for survival, we got AC on this sucker now.
Or a winter only podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Which I don't mind the cold. So we're good with it.
I love it. But yeah, I mean, our food's brought to us, jobs, even in the post-COVID era, like you get to stay at home, work from home. We don't seem to face a whole lot of adversity, and that's a sweeping generalization to say that. But like we don't have to fight anybody for food. We don't have to fight anybody for the right to procreate. Like, it's just easy. And I feel like life was so much harder just 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So much more difficult.
Well, I see people constantly talking about the hardest thing they did all day was they got in 2 minutes of cold water.
Right.
And I think like if that's the hardest thing and that's how you're basically creating mental resilience and becoming this like urban warrior with 2 minutes of cold, that's a bad deal.
And I've said that. I've said that out loud because I'm borrowing it from a friend that told me, he's the one who talked me into doing the cold plunge, building one. He's like, man, start your day with it because it'll be the hardest thing you do all day.
Isn't that fucking sad?
And after that, it's easy. Like, I had to write 17 emails. It was just such a horrible day today. Like, that's kind of shitty.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I try to do something hard every day. It's like a big thing for me. I mean, whether it's training, jiu-jitsu or fighting, and then even on the days out here working, like I just cut down, I showed you that massive cedar.
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny deal. It's like 60 feet. It's like on the creek side, and I'm like looking at the fence, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna drop it in the fence. I'm gonna cut it onto the creek.
Right.
So as I'm kind of going through, and I was watching all these videos on how they're trying to fell these big trees. I figure I got it right. I cut it, and the thing literally, I was like aiming here, like fell right between the fence and the creek. And if I tried to drop it here, I would have killed my fence.
Right.
I'm like, for once, my stupidity did not fucking reign. But I feel like, going outside, working in like the heat and being able to do this stuff is almost like a little bit of a badge of resilience. Like we can still do these things.
Yeah. I can still sweat. I can still suffer.
Yeah.
I mean, did you at least use a chainsaw?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I am smart enough to not get out there with an axe. I tried that at one point, and then you get to the point where you're like, there's no way I'm going to fell this thing.
What am I doing?
Yeah. But I do have a nice chainsaw, so I do like that.
Yeah.
But then like being able to cube it up and throw it over and drag it out. But no, I mean, there's got to be something, maybe a little bit more hardship, and we've created hardship. And we find for humans that if we don't have hardship, people create hardship.
Right.
And that's a scary thing where now all of a sudden you have imaginary hardship.
Yeah. I mean, I know you have some friends that are or were in the military. I mean, we've met.
We still actively,
Parsley,
we still actively work with Naval Special Warfare. We were just last week out in Virginia Beach working with the guys at Damnick. So
yeah,
those are skilled individuals that are doing a very unique job, and I mean, kind of hardship is what they do. So,
right, and that's the point, right? You look at those guys, and I know that Navy SEALs in the past 25, 30 years have kind of become the rock stars of the military, and if you're going to have a rock star, I mean, they've earned it. Yeah. But we look at those guys, and I think in general, people look up to them and they envy them, and you're like, oh, so that's what it could be like if I experienced hardship every single day, training every day, preparing every single day. And there's a reason they look and act like that. I envy them too.
They do have a cool life. They get to shoot guns. They get to train all day. And then they get to send a lot of emails. Yeah, it was funny that the squad we were working with, their command master chief, really good dude, came down and he trained with us. And like, what are you doing? He's like, going back to my life behind a computer. Like, that's what he does. He sends emails and, comes down and trains and does what he can. But like his job is a logistical job, which, for those guys, kind of seems like a slow death. But incredible dude. So yeah, like Doc Parsley's another one. So we've been really fortunate to work in that community. And, they know a little bit something about hardship.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
So unlike football players that just get to sweat out in the middle of the heat.
Yeah, but you also in the equivalent of like a fist fight every 60 seconds.
Oh, it's great. I loved it. I got to do it for 10 years, and it was by far the best job in the world. Somebody got to pay me to go out there and beat up people.
That's awesome.
I did play in the hottest game in NFL history, though.
Okay.
Dallas, September 1, noon, 2001, at Old Dallas Stadium with the roof cut out. They call it the pickle juice game. So it was like 100 and something. It was 163 degrees on the field.
Oh my goodness.
So they came in and were like, hey, if you lay down on the field, there's a good chance you could overheat and die. So don't get hurt and don't lay down.
Right. Oh, that was the old stadium, Irving?
Yeah. Yeah,
wow.
the one where it was like a dome, but they cut the roof out.
Yeah.
And then it was noon was the game.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It's pretty much a sauna.
Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah.
But now they have incredible air condition and that massive jumbotron and like all of that. I mean, it's like last year we went to Houston Astros game. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty hot. Like we were going down and like I looked at where the tickets were and I'm like, man, we're going to be right in that afternoon sun. And we got down there and the roof was closed and it was air conditioned and it was like the nicest game I'd ever been to. I was like, man, this is pretty nice.
Got it easy.
Yeah.
Got it easy.
Well, it's, you guys showed up with some really cool tech.
Yeah.
And how is that being received by people? Do people understand that like how nice and easy it is? The fact that I can get the kit to the house. I can do the sample itself, pack it up, and I don't have to go to a lab core or someplace to take labs.
I'm not blowing smoke up your ass when I say that all of the feedback we get from the experience from the very beginning, being able to order the assessment kit online, use it, send it off, and have a HIPAA compliant Zoom with a clinician, it's nothing but rave reviews that we get. Funny enough, it's kind of an internal joke when we talk about collecting blood, or even when you get to the point of doing injections, because we've got a device that helps make that practically painless. It's always the biggest, strongest looking, scariest men that are deathly afraid of needles.
Really?
It really is. Huh. And, we've got guys that we talk to that, were in the league for years, and they laugh about it now. They're just like, I didn't think giving blood could actually be painless. They sat on their kits for 3 weeks because they're like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And they finally get around to doing it, and they're blown away. Yeah. I mean, we test people every 3 months for the first year. So, I mean, I'm still using it and kind of laugh every time I put it on my arm.
Yeah.
But yeah, very well received.
Do you think this will become the industry standard? Are people moving that way?
We've seen a couple other places employ the device, but they're going to have to.
Yeah.
Like they're going to have to, because no one wants to prick the finger. No one wants to go to the lab with the big needle.
What was the finger prick Thanos with the
Theranos.
Theranos. Yeah, she's in jail.
Box.
Yeah.
I can. What was it? Collect like 300.
It was one drop.
Yeah, with like 300 markers.
Right.
And I remember when that tech came out, Tom Incledon, who's, like I said, our buddy out in Arizona, who's done blood work on every professional athlete I know, is like, this is impossible unless there's some new tech that's popped up in the last like 10 minutes. Yeah. She's defrauding people. And then sure enough, like people were throwing money at her. I mean, she raised an incredible amount of money. Yeah. Now I think she's sitting in state prison or federal prison. Yeah. Yeah. One drop of blood to be able to collect that. Like, pretty amazing.
When that came out, like I didn't know what I know today about blood collection, anticoagulants, the machines that they use at the lab to get the analytes that we need. I was bought in too. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. This will be great. But knowing what I know now, I'm just like, yeah, that was complete bullshit.
Makes sense that, not possible.
So that tech happens, and then people obviously send in, and then what's the turnaround time for, like the blood sample where then the person gets in and you deliver everything through an online portal?
Yeah. So when you ship your blood back, it's overnight because we don't want it to coagulate. I mean, the tube has some substances to
anticoagulants.
Yeah, to help alleviate that. But lab results are usually ready within 24 hours.
Yeah, 24
the turnaround time is quick. And once that 24 hours goes by, like you're ready to talk to a clinician. And we reach out, and we've got a great client success team that like holds your hand throughout the entire process. And they would be like, hey, Jason, it's time to talk to, Ryan Lester or, any of our other clinicians. And they make the determination. You've given medical history, because we've got intake forms, but they're all digital. We tried to get rid of the whole write your name at the top of the page 10 times, which they still do in clinics today.
Well, it's all HIPAA stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have like the HIPAA compliance stuff's insane.
It is.
So we go through, like I said, my son's a type 1, so we do a ton of testing on him and all these different stuff. I mean, like the medical machine in terms of like managing some form of chronic autoimmune illness like this is the scariest thing I've ever seen. Like if you have a heart attack, you get a gunshot. Like I trust American or westernized medicine. Right. Like they'll fix you up. Like I've seen guys have like some amazingly acute injuries. The guy gets shot 20 times or heart stops and this, and they go in there and save him. But in terms of like managing these kind of chronic, kind of long-term things, it's not good.
And preventing the chronic stuff, like forget about that.
Right. Yeah. Tinfoil hat moment. But like I have this thought at least once a week where I'm like, man, there's no money in healthy people. No. Or at least that's the way I think the big guys look at it. Like, how much revenue would disappear if preventative medicine was the thing?
If they cured type 1 diabetes, like the lifetime cost for a type 1 diabetic, I mean, you're talking tens of millions of dollars per person through insurance and this. And it's, even preventative stuff like type 2 diabetes, disease of carbohydrates. Just eat less carbs, lose 20 pounds. And for the most part, type 2 abates.
Yeah.
I mean, but also the interesting things when you go through and you look at all of the symptoms of low testosterone. I just went through this with one of the guys that works for me. He was a race car driver, had a chronic, really nasty head injury 10 years ago. His sleep has been like every day since then has been worse, to the point where like he just was almost a zombie. And he's telling me like, I'm having all these issues. And I'm like, everybody, I'm like, I just think you're just being a huge pussy.
Yeah.
Drink coffee, get the fuck up,
Right.
do your shit. And so I've been like on his ass. So finally, I sent him out and got all his blood work done. They came back and they were like, he's not producing any hormones.
Yeah.
Like zero. If you don't sleep, you don't produce hormones, which is what Doc Parsley has really pioneered and did for the SEAL teams. So then Doc looked at it and Doc's like, this is like an 82-year-old man. Like, how's this guy even getting out of bed? And I was like, all right, maybe you're not a big liar. Yeah. So then all of a sudden we started, going through and helping him a little bit. And it's like 6 a.m. at work by 8. Like, I've never felt better. Started losing weight. And it was like his entire demeanor was changing. He was like aging like in Lord of the Rings. You remember like the old dude and he like snatches the demon out of him and he turns young. It's like that.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's pretty amazing because for the most part, andropause is what, it's kind of I don't know if that's an official term within the medical community. I kind of see it used quite often with a lot of the hormone replacement stuff. It's kind of a real deal. I mean, they know menopause, but this idea that as men age, testosterone declines and all the things that make you feel virile are associated with testosterone.
Right. Yeah. The guys benefit from a gradual decline. But I mean, as we know, the ladies, unfortunately, it's like they fall off a cliff. Mm-hmm. It's like nature looks at them and says, well, you're not going to make babies anymore. So we're going to start shutting down systems. They go peri-menopause and post-menopause. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize how bad that was until we got, we started building Wellcore and talking about the female protocols and the symptoms, and it's horrible. Speaking of symptoms, you touched on one of the hills that we have to climb when building this company. HRT has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was always marketed, and this is a term we use, and I preface it with, I don't want to offend anybody. It was always marketed as a boners and biceps solution.
Sure.
Because that's what dudes would buy. Like, want to get jacked, want to have a bunch of sex. Those are great second, third order effects of having optimized hormone levels. But you talk about sleep, you talk about mood, bone density, cardiovascular resiliency, like the list goes on. And you start to realize why people who are taking shortcuts with marketing go, feel young again, feel like you're in your 20s. Because it's a great shortcut. It's a quick get to say that. But part of what we want to do is educate people on hormone optimization. I don't even like hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to make that go away, but like we will continually say hormone optimization is something that will enable you to do what is important to you for longer.
Mm-hmm.
So for some guys, it's going to be lifting heavier, lifting longer, lifting more frequently, better recovery, better sleep. But for some people, it could be a 40, 50, 60-year-old that just wants to stay in the workforce because they've learned a lot. They have a ton of experience, but there's always going to be some young up and comer that they've got to fight off, or they got to just start working towards retirement.
Sure.
I want to be 70 and still going toe to toe with those guys, like a time machine. Like, I know so much more than you, and I'm going to utilize it. And my enabler is going to be optimized hormones and what it allows me to do, stay fit. I started eating healthier when I started optimizing my hormones because I'm like, well, this had such an impact on my life. Surely if I do this better and this better and this better, those marginal gains will add up to be something big. So a lot of our time is spent walking that fine line between marketing and advertising to get someone's attention. And being honest, the entire time, we're not blowing smoke, but then educating so that they understand it. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as they get on with a clinician, education just goes through the roof because that's what they spend their time doing.
Do you find that most people, obviously if they're reaching out to get a test kit, like they're feeling that, hey, these are symptoms I have. Mm-hmm. Is it something where you could even market it to, like, let's say healthy people? Like, hey, it's good to have, because I recommend everybody get their blood work done. I like to get my blood work done twice a year and, look at everything and make sure everything's, functioning right. And I've gotten that blood work done almost every 6 months since I was like 23 years old. Yeah. So I have like 20 plus years of every 6 months. So that's then, awesome. The problem is with testing, people are just looking at a single snapshot in time. Right. now all of a sudden I have 20 years of testing, and now we look at trends over time. And, maybe one of the recommendations is, hey, you know what, this might not be something that's happening to you today, but here's an option for you to get tested so that we can effectively, put some protocols together that might help you manage this a little farther down the road, which seems maybe we're getting out of far on our skis. I mean, I clicked on, did a research, and it was this fucking neon sign and this bodybuilder dude that's obviously taking way more than testosterone, the hot chick and this. I'm just looking at it being I feel I don't know if I'm getting sold ecstasy or what the fuck is this stuff?
Yeah, is this an escort service?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's it felt like I was going to get an OnlyFans pop up. But it's such a weird market. And then there's a whole bunch of pro bodybuilders that are hey, click on my thing and we do testosterone replacement. And I'm what are those guys just take out of the gym and put on a lab coat? It's
right. They're walk down, it's going to be in this locker.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. And
as that market, and obviously over the years we've had a lot of people that were doing some hormone optimization reach out to us, and every time I looked at it, I kind of was ooh, I don't know if I want to have this. But when I saw your guys' stuff, one, I like the collection site, and I like the fact that it looked like something that I would feel comfortable sending my parents or even our clients, being because even you guys did some ads through the podcast. I had people hit me up, hey, we got our samples. We're super excited. This looks very professional. I'm yeah, I'm not going to send you something that looks, shows up in hot pink or neon or something where it looks cheesy as fuck.
Right. So I got to ask, I want to unpack a couple of things. You said that you've been doing fairly comprehensive panels since you were 23.
Yeah.
Was that something that you just inherently knew to do and you chose to do it, or was it a product of being in the NFL?
It was a product of being in the NFL.
Okay.
So I was constantly looking for optimization and trying to figure out there's, we got drug tested anywhere from 20 to 30 times a year. So when you get drug tested so much, there's a whole bunch of things that you can't take. So my whole deal was let's figure out how to optimize the things that are supposed to be there. And a big part of that had to do with vitamins and minerals and a lot of things that I was deficient in. I have a gluten allergy that ended up binding up receptor sites in the gut, which made things hard to attach. So being able to clear that up and getting a bunch of food allergy testing done every couple of months, every 6 months was real helpful. So figuring out what foods to eat and then basically supplementing with the things that I'm low in. So the food today, I think, is 70% as nutritious as it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, it's just the nutrient density is so low of the food that we eat that now we have to supplement to get things that, potentially were there 100 years ago.
Right.
So that was a big push for me. And then also playing in the NFL. The NFL's not real good on telling you the truth on a lot of things. You get injured, the doctor would look at you, he'd go in the office and talk to the head coach and the trainer, and then they would come out and tell you what was wrong.
Yeah.
Always just felt super, super shady.
Yeah.
So I always found my own doc and would go out and get all my own testing done. And I wanted to know if something was a problem. I found that I would much rather tackle something when it's a small problem than wait to the end and say, oh shit, now how do I deal with this?
Right.
So that's kind of what I did. Every year I would get just a physical and blood work done, and then before I go to training camp. And what I was just looking for was what were the massive changes? They gave us Toradol shots, anti-inflams, painkillers, and there was a whole lot of different things that people would just hand you very nonchalantly, oh, here, take this, take this, take this.
Right.
And I kind of wanted to see how it affected me over time.
Did you find that was common amongst other players?
No.
You were taking a preventative approach, whether you knew it or not.
Well, I was looking at it from a optimization.
Yeah.
If I don't have zinc, magnesium, and iron and selenium, my body won't make testosterone. So if I'm low in all those, then do I really have low T?
Right.
So being able to optimize those things was really big. And then just being able to figure that everything was really good. How we, obviously, even if testosterone's high, a lot of it gets eaten up by that sex-binding globulin hormone within the liver. So now all of a sudden I can do things to kind of manage that side, which means what I'm working with is a little more optimized.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, it just came down to that and just, looking for a bunch of low-level inflammation and different, whether it be parasites or viruses that people tend to get, and then they tend to cause problems.
Right.
So it was just about hey, if I got to do this job and I got to play at a high level, everything needs to fire. And that was what I did it for.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of mindset that we would like to instill in people, even if it means they don't end up becoming a patient. There's an altruistic,
there'll always be a patient. I've always thought, as I'm kind of suggesting it, man, it'd be great to be able to market this to people. But hey, you might not need it today, but why don't we get the blood work ahead of time? And, because I'm sure if people sign up, they're expecting you to write them a script. I don't know if somebody's stuff looks great. You're I don't know if we can prescribe it to you. You just look pretty good. But hit us back in 6 months. I mean, if there's a massive
Happens all
change.
the time. Yeah.
You know, I say the two separate entities here, Wellcore Medical Group. You guys say no a lot. I feel like
We say no. I don't know. So a true rejection due to contraindications, I would say it's probably 2 or 3 out of 10. And then, I would say at least 1 or 2 out of 10, the person's not eligible, meaning they don't have symptoms. Their levels are pretty good.
Mhm.
It's just not appropriate to prescribe testosterone the way we think is the right way to do it. So that's the conversation we have. Hey, things look pretty good now, but we know over time these hormones are likely going to decline. So I tell people, continue to check this at least once a year.
Smart.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but it's, I think the hurdle for most people was just one, I got to go to a doctor and he's got to prescribe it. And then I got to go to a place. And now it's as simple as just hitting you guys up, sending a kit. I mean, even if I was in my 20s and this was available, I would just do it every 6 months just so that I would have the blood work. And, I think you guys do like 26 different
just
markers.
2 dozen, yeah.
And I think over time we discussed that they're going to start adding more and more markers as it becomes the technology improves.
Right.
Somebody all of a sudden is able to get 30, 40 markers and I can kind of track those over time and look at some trends. I think it's just a heady thing to do.
I welcome that race of like, how fast can we get convenient, painless at-home testing with just more and more and more and more markers.
Mm-hmm. And it's coming. And I can't tell you how many times I see a guy in their late 30s, early 40s, and I'm like, do you have a primary care physician? I'm like, no. I'm like, when was the last time you saw a physician or had you even had your blood pressure
when
checked?
I played high school football and the guy had to basically play with my nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, I can't remember the last time.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon where I see, because we check liver function, kidney function, a basic lipid panel, and then we look at thyroid down the line. I'll see guys with cholesterol, numbers that are really high, or their kidney function is half of what it should be for their age, and they had no idea.
Wow.
And we say, let's just not even consider testosterone. Like, we caught this stuff really pretty early, and like, go find a doc, get this stuff addressed, then come back and we can talk about further optimization. But the more and more guys I see, and even females, although they're better about seeing clinicians
because they have lady parts.
Yeah.
Very complicated.
Yeah. No, I have 2 daughters and my wife and all that. My daughters just went for her well check yesterday. So like the measurement and all that stuff. And so they're like, with I have twins that are 11, they're going to be 12. So like they're at that, like, I love saying it. It's so like it totally upsets my wife and my daughters, but I'm like, well, you guys are at the point where you're blossoming into womanhood. And they're like, shut up. I'm like, yes. So I try to embarrass the shit out of them with it. But like for them, it's super important. But I think as guys, like you're at an interesting point in this like late 30s, early 40s, especially with guys having kids a lot later. That's another big issue. I mean, I didn't have my kid. I had my kids in my early 30s. Now I wish I had them in my like late teens and early 20s because then sleep didn't really matter.
Right.
But they're in this interesting piece, and the amount of stories I hear from guys where it's like, we can't get pregnant, we're having these problems, and it feels like fertility is a really big issue. It'd be great if we could manage this stuff ahead of time.
Yeah, agreed. And we do get people that will get all the way to talking to a clinician, and they're just like, thanks. I just want to know where I was. Wanted to see my levels. Like, oh, okay. And even levels is like another conversation.
Like, what is the optimum? Like, I mean, everybody sees like a range, and you'll see like a total test, free test. And, I tell people like the free test is like going to the grocery store. It's all the food that you have, like what you actually buy and take home. That's the free. It's kind of my analogy.
What's usable.
Yeah. What's usable.
Yeah. I'll give you my opinion and then clinical opinion. Every single person is different. Like trying to boil us down. Every single man or even woman in the United States is somehow supposed to fit into a range. That range is a representative of the population.
Sure.
Like, what are they seeing everywhere else? Clinical low testosterone hypogonadism is when you're 300 nanograms per deciliter or lower, right? Mm-hmm. Some guys will feel the effects of low testosterone way before they get to 300.
Wow.
So I tell friends and family and anyone that I come across, I was like, don't focus on the number. Focus on the symptoms. Talk to the clinician about everything else that's going on in your body. And like, let's see if there is a there to fix.
Like, what's the first canary in the coal mine then? I mean, if I get tested and I'm 300, but I still feel pretty good, but then some guy, let's say he's 600, comes and he's like, man, I'm gaining more body fat. I don't have the same sexual drive I want. My sleep is bad. My performance in the gym is failing. And I mean, these are kind of the stories that you guys hear told over time.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but like I think it has to be a confluence of variables. Like I don't think someone who comes in and says like, "Hey, I'm having a really hard time getting hard and I don't want to have sex anymore." Like that's not enough. Like there's got to be more.
No, that would be do it for me. That'd be like fucking dial 911. What the fuck is going on in my life? I need to call somebody immediately. Get the president on the phone. I mean, the real president, not the old guy who's up there right now.
Yeah.
President.
But
how much
for
testosterone
us-
do you think they got Joe Biden on? You think they're giving him like a gram a day?
not enough.
Not
Yeah.
enough.
I think like we were trying to play a game like what the drugs we thought Joe Biden was on. We definitely thought
Oh,
he was
I
on
love that
testosterone. Parsley actually gave me like 7 there. It's like Provigil, Adderall, like testosterone shot, and like 4 or 5 things. And Parsley's like, you could get like a Weekend at Bernie's moment, get a dead dude up there to get up there.
You beat me to it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you mean strings and a stick?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so that was Parsley's deal. He's like, and then we researched him, and it was like a mix of Adderall, Provigil, and then it was testosterone, and he had like 2 or 3 other things. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And he's like, look at his eyes, and Doc's so smart.
right.
He's like the nutty professor in that way. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to diverge off on this.
No,
I've thought about that before. I'm like, what do they have him on?
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, so they also have, and I only know this because an individual that we do work with told us this firsthand. There's some form of apparatus that he wears that let them know whether or not he's got number 1 or number 2 and whether to get him out of there.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
We'll talk about age limits for politicians another day.
dude, 100%. Like, if you were born before the advent of like the cell phone,
Right.
I
Or
mean,
just
yeah.
go look at like the most successful companies and like the makeup of their executive team.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take the whole conversation there because
Yeah.
on the drive here, we touch on that stuff every time we're in
Well,
the car.
I feel like
We probably have to
anybody
get him a microphone.
anybody who's
Yeah.
somewhat intelligent and like runs a business and has done this is looking at it from their point of view, and they're like, there's no way that if America's a business that you choose this as your CEO, as your leader.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a Trump fan by any means, like the whole ridiculous spray tan and the whole like just everything about him, but like at least he's pretty active.
Right.
Like he's got his awkward little dance, but at least he's dancing.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so
His
I
golf swing is slightly better than Charles Barkley.
I just hope that like somebody's hiding somewhere that like comes out like a non-crazy person. Where we look and we're like, oh, this guy's not a crazy person. Where's that guy?
Well,
But or do you have to be a crazy person to even get to that point in life that you
We
want to
have-
be president?
that you want to be in that role.
one candidate that's very open about their use of hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, is
Kennedy.
Kennedy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he had his shirt off. He's pretty jacked.
Well,
didn't know that.
I feel like we shot called it. Like we were seeing some of the content, and then it's like he's on Venice Beach, like doing bench press and stuff. And I'm like, guys,
Yeah, he's taking something.
Did
he's
not know that.
optimized. And then
Yeah.
he came out and he said something. I feel like more and more famous people are actually coming out.
Yeah.
Michelle
Starting to hear about
Obama
more.
mentioned it. Oprah mentioned it. There's
How much
several-
testosterone was Michelle Obama on? Is that what you're asking?
She's optimized.
She's optimized. Good. I like it.
Well,
Yeah,
the female HRT space doesn't have nearly as much stigma as the male does.
Well,
Right.
I actually read a little bit of in prep for this. I read a deal of why it's not stigmatized, because back I guess in like the 40s and the 50s, when all of a sudden like they started kind of understanding menopause, men were extremely like going to the doctors and be like, "What the fuck is wrong with my wife? Give her something." And so it was actually like classified as like hysteria, and it was actually husbands like pushing this forward, like help my wife be normal so you can make my life normal.
Yeah.
So that's why it wasn't stigmatized, because men were pushing it through. Whereas I think guys look at it from like, this kind of performance enhancing, almost like a little bit of cheating. Like you're not as virile as me
Yeah.
because you have to take something.
Yeah, the so much of that stigma for men, I think, comes from sports and
That's where I got it.
Yeah, that's how I get it.
Well, was it like the Mark McGuire? You remember the Bash Brothers,
yeah.
where all of a sudden, I mean, baseball was never been better. And those
Right.
guys were juiced to the gills, but yet he'd have like the
Right.
bottle of Androstene Dion over his shoulder.
And I was a dummy and tried that stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's-
How did all that work? Did it?
I was pretty jacked. I mean, but my bedroom was also a mattress on the floor in the corner with an Olympic weight set in the middle. So like that's all I did.
Lift weights. And you're like, it's this little bottle of Andro.
Yeah. When really it was just lifting weights.
Yeah, lifting heavy weights.
Yeah.
So with the women collect the same way as the men, but how does that piece work? Estrogen obviously the large driver for women. How does that optimization work on the women's side?
So the only difference between the male lab panel and the female is, for the females we look at progesterone.
Mhm.
For the males we look at prostate specific antigen, or PSA. The females, really, when their hormones and their ovarian function starts to decline, they lose typically progesterone and testosterone first, and then the estradiol is the last thing to go. So we offered those three hormones: testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone for the women. Most of the perimenopausal women that come to us, so you have to be over the age of 40 in order to be eligible for the program. Most of those women are a good candidate for at least progesterone. Depending on symptoms, they could be a great candidate for testosterone as well. And then when they stop producing estradiol, that's when we add that back. And we know from the studies that the sooner we can start to bring those hormones back and optimize them, the lower the risk of all the things that are going to likely kill us: cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer. All those things go down the sooner we can start to improve those hormones for women.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's not really, I mean, everybody hears about estrogen when they think about declining estrogen levels, but it's not actually estrogen, which was how they really were dealing with menopause for so long, and they were giving women estrogen pills, which I think was leading to higher rates of breast cancer.
Yeah. Well, it was the type of pill, right? It was a non-bioidentical form of estrogen and progesterone from the Women's Health Study in the early 2000s. So the big stigma in the female space was these hormones cause cancer, which turns out not to be true. Actually, the hormones they used in the WHI did cause cancer, but the ones we use today don't.
Yeah.
So that's the stigma we fight, which is very different than the men's side. But estrogen is really important in women, don't get me wrong, but the progesterone and testosterone are equally as important.
So as men age, obviously there's all these contributing factors that start kind of leading to lower testosterone. What would be, and I'm sure it's different for everybody, but what's kind of the median age, where all of a sudden now it feels like I felt pretty good and then all of a sudden it's here? Is it late 30s, early 40s?
But I think it's fair to say now, because the general population is less healthy, there's more metabolic dysfunction. We're seeing those levels and the whole hormonal cascade start to decline much earlier, early to mid 30s. I think it's fair to say. It's very much lifestyle driven. Mm-hmm. Nutrition, sleep, exercise, alcohol, all those things contribute.
So do you have, would you say that in the questionnaires, usually people are pretty honest in questionnaires. We found this through, Train Heroic in our programs, that if we ask questions, for the most part, if people are paying you and they're expecting like, hey, if I'm honest, this will benefit me in a way, they usually give pretty good information. So would you say that, obviously lifestyle contributing factors? I mean, I know alcohol kills it. I remember reading something interesting where if you want to get testosterone replacement, you stay out till like 3 a.m. drinking, and then you show up still hungover and shit-faced, and your testosterone will be on the floor.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
So with how did Wellcore come about? When we went over to your office in downtown Austin and meet with you guys, it was kind of an interesting collection. It wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. You guys are all kind of from different kind of you'd say like different backgrounds. It wasn't just like one dude in a lab coat and some guy with like a mustache, like twirling his mustache.
I've got an idea. A lot of luck. So this would have been 2021. I was closing out my time at a telemedicine company. We built a telemedicine platform and sold it to doctors and clinics and organizations. And we saw the end of, COVID and the lockdowns and stuff coming. And business was great at that time, but like anytime they talked about opening the country back up, we would see utilization of the telemedicine platform plummet. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, here's, doctors and clinicians going back to their old way of doing things. They want you to come back into the office. So we worked to pivot that company to a completely different model. And, I was an equity holder there, so I wanted it to be successful, but I knew I was working my way out of a job. And I get a phone call from this group called Redbud Brands. And they were like, look, we've got this idea for building out like a human optimization platform utilizing, telemedicine, virtual care technologies. And we wanted to talk to you about it. And at the time, I was going to go into taking some time off, building some stuff like you are.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is actually right up my alley because I had done, tech and IT and IS and human performance. I was at Under Armour for a long time, and now telemedicine. And I start talking to them, and one of the first things they mention is HRT. And I'm like, well, strangely enough, like I've been on HRT for the better half of 15 years, and I'm a believer.
Wow. Didn't
really tell anybody about it. Like I always kept that to myself. You mentioned, the cheating athletes. Like that was, I felt like I was a cheater, so I didn't tell anybody. So start talking to these guys and realize that the founders are the people behind things like Sweet Leaf Tea, Deep Eddy Vodka, C4 Energy Drink, Skinny Pop Popcorn. Like I could go on. Very successful consumer packaged goods. And they're like, we want to go into this healthcare space. And we're recruiting for somebody to come in and be the GM to build it from the ground up and ultimately become the CEO when you launch the business. And they connected me with the former CFO of the Low T Center. And that's Bill. Bill ended up becoming my co-founder. And it was basically him and I in the beginning. And it was like, all right, human optimization platform. What's that going to look like? What's it going to do? And like I said earlier, the first thing we wanted to tackle was blood and making it convenient, making it painless. And so the plans started taking shape. When we found the painless blood collection, we found the labs that could process those vials. We had pharmacy connections from past lives. So we got really picky with interviewing them and talking to them about what they could do. We started working on building out the tech platform, which is basically a vertically integrated electronic health record system, right? With, virtual care bolted on. And then we found this guy.
Did he have a cool mustache then too?
He didn't.
No, it's later.
He wasn't threatening speeding tickets back then. But we found Ryan and the guy that ended up becoming our chief medical officer, Dr. Dumitrescu, Caleb Greer, our nurse practitioner. That's like our healthcare triad, like the healthcare team triad. And then we started building. We started recruiting. We knew that marketing was going to be a big deal for us. We had a couple fits and starts there. But at the core of all of this is Redbud Brands like funding us. They've also got what's called a shared services team. I think they're at like 60 people now. But legal support, supply chain support, operations support, and even marketing support. So it's a really interesting yet very efficient way of building companies. Because I've built companies in the past with my own money in my own time. And it's really hard. It's really stressful. So this has been, stressful. It's a roller coaster, right? When you're building a startup, we have very good days, very good weeks, but also some that just kind of knock you down. But now the team has grown. We've got people like Ryan that help tell the story across social media and other platforms, and finding people like you. But we're all of 2 years into this. We launched the business late January of this year is when we told the world that we even existed. And even then, it's not like we had a megaphone. A lot of it was word of mouth, family and friends. But we feel like we're definitely starting to catch fire now because people, to your point, relate to the painless aspects, the convenience aspects. But then once they really get involved in the process, they're like, oh, this is personalized. You're looking at the whole person. You're not just trying to dole out as much medication as you possibly can. You're absolutely not. But it all started with a phone call and connecting a few like-minded individuals, and we've been off to the races ever since.
Is if somebody hits low T, is it just testosterone that you get that is prescribed? Or there are other things like ancillary, like DHEA, progesterone, some of the other things that are maybe some over-the-counters that tend to supplement really well with that?
Yeah, we look at DHEA and often recommend over-the-counter supplementation for both males and females. Testosterone, obviously, we offer clomiphene as well, or Clomid for the males, and then progesterone for the females.
Yeah, that helps. Testicular density. To avoid.
You mean pregnenolone?
Oh, is that the pregnenolone?
Probably.
What does the Clomid do, or the Clomid?
So clomiphene, or the brand name Clomid, is an estrogen receptor blocker. So it blocks the receptors throughout the body, particularly in the brain, and it tricks the brain into thinking there's not enough testosterone in the periphery. So when we block the estrogen or block it a little bit, the brain, the pituitary specifically, starts sending increased signals to the testes saying, produce more testosterone, produce more sperm. Because it's been used off-label in the for males for several decades to increase fertility. And it's FDA approved in the female space to increase fertility.
So that's a deal where you start taking exogenous testosterone, start skewing the hypothalamus axis. All of a sudden, your testes get up. We have too much. They start underproducing, and the aceclidine tricks them back into producing.
Yeah,
keeping testicular function.
One of the unique things about our program is if you want to have children in the future or may want to have children, you want to maintain fertility,
Sure.
We're not going to recommend testosterone.
Yeah.
We don't even, now there's a lot of people who do that and do it successfully. They start testosterone, they come off it, they cycle it properly, they get their sperm counts back up,
I
they
know
have kids.
several dudes
Yeah.
that were on massive amounts of testosterone that still had kids.
It's very doable.
Yeah.
It's just not the way that we want to scale this and do it.
Yeah.
So we don't recommend T for those men. In other words, for those men who are symptomatic, have low T, clomiphene is our tool.
So if somebody comes in and, hey, I have low T, but I still want to have kids. I'm still of childbearing age. Then that's something you put together.
We recommend clomiphene. Right.
Nice. Any side effects with that, or any other issues with it?
It's well tolerated for the most part.
Is it a dose-related deal, like every day?
It really depends on the person and genetics. Some men will have, and the side effects are pretty uncommon, but when they occur, kind of right away. Your mood is off. It's going the other way. You're irritable, headaches. Some people can have some visual changes, which is pretty rare. And in those men, it's just not the right med for them. And that's typically a genetic thing. So they stop it. But they can even encounter those at lower doses. So it can be dose related, but it's mostly kind of a genetic thing.
Do you ever prescribe any anti-estrogens like Arimidex, Aromacin, any of those? Like similar to like kind of what happened to my dad, where all of a sudden now you're in this aromatization deal where he has zero testosterone and it's through the roof.
So we're of the belief, based on the clinical studies, that estrogen's a good thing, and that it doesn't increase the risk of a cardiac event. It doesn't increase the risk of clotting, based on the high quality reproducible literature that's mostly randomized controlled trials.
But you guys are also doing therapeutic dose, not the super physiological, where now all of a sudden you get these huge spikes.
Yeah. So no men, our program, the max dose we'll put somebody on is 200 milligrams a week. The average dose is about 160 milligrams a week.
Yeah. And then you're spreading those shots over the course of a whole week?
Two a week, every 3 to 4 days.
Yeah, I remember I did a consult recently for a guy who was on testosterone. He was having some issues, but they were also doing a real long needle IM and doing them just once a week or once every 7 to 10 days.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was like, dude, that's like 1970s literature.
Right.
Subcutaneous in the fat every 3 days ideal. If you wanted to even break it up even more, you could do it every other day. Just depends on how many times you want to get stuck.
Some guys feel best doing it daily if they don't mind the injection every day.
Yeah. I mean, that way it's consistent instead of getting this big hit. So, short needle.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like there's so much kind of bro science and just shitty science with this that have kind of stuck with it that you almost wish you could just go erase all this stuff.
Right? Yeah, definitely. The Traverse trial was really helpful. This most recent trial that came out with the testosterone cream. Mm-hmm. You familiar with it?
I'm familiar with the testosterone cream just because I knew it was with my dad. But I have the only thing I do know about the testosterone cream, it tends to have a higher aromatization phase. So I know that they were having some issues with it. It wasn't as kind of steady as the injectable, at least from what I read.
Yeah, it really depends on the cream, whether it's compounded or a brand product. But the Traverse trial is really the first large randomized trial looking at men with cardiovascular disease. Mm-hmm. So they have a history of heart attack, stroke, stent placement. They have diagnosed heart disease on cholesterol meds. And they gave these men testosterone cream at pretty much the standard dose of what the creams are doing.
What would be that standard dose, or how does that equate out?
80 to 100 milligrams twice a day. So typically the creams are done once or twice a day. We like it twice a day. We offer a cream as well. We think it just produces a little bit more stable levels.
Where do you rub it?
Scrotum.
Right
to the scrotum.
Nice. Fucking don't put it in your armpits. Go right to the fucking main line.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And don't let it touch anybody else.
Yeah, and transference is a real deal. So, but the Traverse trial really looked at men with heart disease, put them on the testosterone. Almost 6,000 men, so really, really well-powered study. And the results came out probably a month ago, and no increased risk of a cardiovascular event, and it actually showed a slight decrease in risk. That's really the first good randomized trial.
I have not seen that, but it just came out a month ago.
It was sponsored and paid for by a pharmaceutical company, so understand there's definitely some confounding there. But it's really the best data we have thus far in men with heart disease. So it really was a secondary prevention trial.
Was that kind of been the like large kicker, especially with a lot of the doctors you're going to, if you're going to elevate your testosterone, this is going to elevate heart disease.
Yeah. So the biggest concern most clinicians in the country that still have is that testosterone causes a cardiac event, heart attack, stroke, or a blood clot. And if you really look at the high quality data over the last 10 to 20 years, it really doesn't support that. And in fact, there's quite a bit that says it actually reduces the risk.
I was going to say it's the contrary. Men with low testosterone have all these issues.
Right, exactly. And then there's a discussion around prostate cancer. We used to think it caused prostate cancer. Now there's data suggesting, and really has been for the last 10 or 20 years, that it reduces the risk of prostate cancer. And now it's being used to treat prostate cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. Some of the most well-respected hormone and testosterone researchers and physicians in the country are using testosterone to treat prostate cancer. Certain types of prostate cancer.
Sure. If
it's too advanced, definitely don't want to do that. But if it's in the capsule, it certainly is a really good treatment option.
Yeah, no, and I know this because, obviously just doing the research, but they have some really interesting ways to treat prostate cancer. They go and they seed it. Removing the prostate is like almost the last resort at this point, which then all of a sudden now you get into a whole host of other problems removing the prostate.
Right. And the androgen deprivation therapy that has been the gold standard makes men feel absolutely awful. They'd rather be dead than be on the meds. So their quality of life goes down, and the studies really don't demonstrate an increase in lifespan, but it actually works.
Yeah.
And so that ship needs to turn. It is starting to slowly.
Yeah, no, I recently looked at some breast cancer stuff, and the drug that they prescribe after, once these women go through the deal to keep away is like 1% effective. So they crush these women's hormone levels, kill all the estrogen, basically turn them into this just bad deal, and just crush every hormone in their body for a 1% improvement or a 1% gain.
Yeah, where's the trade-off there?
Yeah. So, it's pretty interesting. And when you talk to these doctors, it's just like, this is what we do. This is the standard of care. And they just lean so hard on it. And then if you ask any questions, how dare you question me?
They follow the guidelines. Yeah. Well, who makes the guidelines? Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, the people that make the guidelines are influenced heavily by pharmaceutical companies that make a lot of money off these drugs.
Yeah. And when you bring that up and people start taking tinfoil hat and you're like, no. So when we were doing a lot of military contracting, and we had to go hire some lobbyists and go to DC and deal with this stuff. And I got a really interesting chance to see how this whole thing works. And big business does go in and donate the most money, and these are their constituents, and this is how this whole thing works. And the pharmaceutical company is by far one of the largest, most powerful lobbies in the world for a very good reason.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it just kind of makes sense that they would, not to say they're doing things intentionally, or maybe they are, but like to say that they would put these things favorably for these individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's a similar story around thyroid, and the most popular brand of thyroid medication, Synthroid, T4. So.
Do you guys deal in that space? Because I know that testosterone and thyroid are very interdependent.
Definitely. So we check thyroid on the second follow-up lab panel. And then depending on if you're on thyroid or not, then we check it accordingly after that if we put you on thyroid medication.
What about cortisol? I know testosterone and cortisol play in this kind of that same plane. One's elevated, they can't bind, and therefore. Mm-hmm. So is it something you guys are doing some cortisol testing?
Not yet. There's a lot of products and secondary testing we'd like to build in. We really want to get good at the hormones first. No, we don't. But down the road, we definitely want to start to try and find some of these other products and testing that we can bring in that really make sense from an optimization, comprehensive standpoint.
Yeah, well, I guess if you can kind of figure everything, if you can figure out the thyroid, you can figure out testosterone, you can figure out all these other places. They all, nothing exists in a vacuum.
Right.
They're all synergistic effects, so they all should work.
We feel like that's the foundation. If we can start to move those in the right direction, so many other things are going to improve as well. And then if we can start to provide, really high level, high quality, comprehensive lifestyle guidance, whether it's through nutritional coaching or some type partnering with an exercise company that allows us to, provide education.
I know somebody.
Yeah. If you know a guy.
Yeah, if I know a guy, I'll reach out.
So we have all these big aspirations in the future, and then bringing it into the home, right, and still making this very highly accessible at a good price point is going to be key.
Yeah. Well, and then the other big one too, which is always going to be blood sugar, in terms of managing type 1, type 2. And the literature is pretty interesting when all of a sudden you see people start taking exogenous testosterone, get on this, all of a sudden body composition improves. You start gaining muscle. Muscle is extremely much more insulin sensitive, fat's more oxidative. So just the changes in the body composition end up cleaning up a lot of that fasted blood glucose when we start looking at more positive insulin levels.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I really wish the technology gets there, because right now we can't check glucose on our device. We can't check insulin either. they both require some other stuff that we just can't do within the device. Hopefully at some point we'll find a way to be able to check those.
Maybe
but we do have
a separate test that adds on.
I mean, even if it's a finger stick.
Well, I check it on my son numerous times a day.
Right.
And I just had a group send me, so he uses a Dexcom 7, a group that's kind of trying to, so this is another big piece of this market. Now everybody's kind of trying to do all this blood sugar optimization.
Yeah.
The problem is, and from having a son that's type 1, we check his blood and everything, like how food reacts in insulin is very different for a type 1 than a healthy individual.
Oh, yeah.
So they're trying to use a lot of this tech that's designed for it, and they're trying to optimize. And I'm like, dude, like my wife and I both wore it, and there's like it's next to impossible to go from a healthy individual and try to, because I figured, hey, I'll wear it. I'll see what foods I react with, and then maybe be a good indicator for him. No.
Yeah.
The foods being because
we're all different.
A little bit different.
Yeah, and especially with the American Diabetes Association, when they kind of go through and they give you their little class on how you kind of manage food for insulin, they only manage carbohydrates. So the tech told me that they don't count protein in the calculations, and I'm like, but protein has an insulinogenic effect. And they're like, yeah, we don't count it, but yet I've done my blood glucose, I've done him, we've done blood sticks off. It's different for beef, it's different for chicken and proteins and all the other stuff. So it's pretty fascinating when you start looking at trying to optimize blood sugar, how much of a moving target it is.
Yeah, for sure. We would love to be able to bring a device like a CGM and offer it to our clients. But it's a tool, and if you don't understand it and use it the right way, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right. So the right person has to use it. And if they don't know or understand what's happening, we got to provide that education. So it's going to be a task, but boy, it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, when I was wearing it, I would purposely try to dose myself to see how high I could get my blood sugar.
Yeah.
I know it sounds absolutely insane, but there's something that's called non-mediated glucose uptake, which means as you start some from aerobic exercise, it'll drop your blood sugar. So I went out, and the thing that kills my blood sugar the most is Chinese food. MSG, monosodium glutamine, spikes my blood sugar through the roof. So I would get to like 240 and I'd jump on the bike, and 20 minutes later it would just, so that's the idea of like after you eat, going out and taking a walk and doing some exercise.
Yeah.
But even for my son, if his blood sugar's high, I have like a little trampoline, and we have all these different exercise things that I go make him do, try to get his blood sugar to come down naturally. And so he's in a really interesting place. It's called the honeymoon phase, where his beta cells work, but it's very intermittently.
Yeah.
So talk about a moving target. You might give him something, and you're like, okay, he ate this exact meal yesterday, and I know how much I dosed him. Give him the same thing and won't do anything. Other days it crashes him, and some days it goes through the roof.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So but that CGM allows us to see it, but then I never trust it. So then we'll do his finger stick all the time. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Are you seeing that the finger stick and the CGM are pretty close?
No. Like I know when the CGM's lying.
Okay.
Like all of a sudden, like the symptoms, like how you feeling? Like, oh, I feel low. And I'll check it, and the CGM's off. And sometimes he's like, oh, I'll see him kind of bouncing off the walls. I'm like, he's high. So for the most part, I bet you about 80% it's right. But then sometimes it's completely wrong. But then it allows you to recalibrate. So then you're in this constant recalibration deal.
Yeah. Makes me want to go back and retest, because I wore a CGM for several weeks. And although there was far more information than what I'm about to share, my main takeaway was peanut butter spiked my glucose like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
A margarita with that exact tequila,
Which one?
Espolón Repsolo,
Oh, nice.
had no real effect.
I could drink a bottle of red wine, and it does nothing to my blood sugar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was the most amazing thing. Things that I would think would spike it.
Right.
Nothing, like just did nothing.
Yeah.
And there was a theory that Dr. Incledon had years ago that if you could keep your blood sugar under 80 at all times, you would never gain an ounce of fat. I don't know if it was right or not, but it was kind of the goal. So we found like, what was it? It was lipoic acid, cinnamon. There's all these kind of like natural things that you can use to keep your blood sugar pretty regulated.
Yeah.
So we mess with that a lot.
Interesting.
But I didn't necessarily think too much about insulin. And then when my son got diagnosed, I kind of did a deep dive, and insulin's extremely muscle building, very highly anabolic compound in the body. And a lot of the bodybuilders that you see today, the reason that they are these mass monsters opposed from, let's say, Arnold Schwarzenegger and those other guys 30, 40 years ago, was through the use of insulin.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then growth hormone and some other endogenous stuff.
Sure.
So and you guys are in this interesting space because you're trying to optimize, but then it's like just on the other side of that is like the super physiological kind of bodybuilding, which is kind of such an interesting space. So you guys kind of like exist before it.
Right.
And I wonder how many of these dudes are probably hitting up like 4 or 5 different people at once trying to get a super physiological dose.
We've experienced some folks come in. You mentioned earlier, someone who's paying for good care. Are they honest? Are they sharing everything? The clinical team has uncovered some lies, some people just not being completely honest. And, we got to pass on them. They don't want to be a part of any sort of abuse. We don't want that kind of attention. And plus, it's just not the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
But, you've come across people on like just a litany of stuff that they shouldn't be on.
Yeah, which I'm just amazed. Like, they don't put it on their form, and their testosterone is off the charts. Like, did they not think that it was going to show up on their lab?
Like what would be like an off the chart, like 1600, 2000?
So the highest our test goes is 1500. So I know if I see 1500, it's above that.
Yeah. So they just pegged it and they're like, yeah, I'm having these low T symptoms. And you're like,
Yeah, they have low T symptoms and they are on, magnesium. That's it.
Yeah. Just in a multivitamin.
Yeah.
That's all.
And so, all our clinicians know if there's any slight doubt that this person's being honest with you, first of all, just call them on it. Say, I really, we try and be very transparent. I don't feel like you're being honest with me. Because we are prescribing controlled substance virtually, right? It's the perfect setup for somebody to abuse what we're doing.
Well, how, I understand you guys, you have a medical director, you have clinicians, people trained. Like, how are all these other kind of like if you do a Google, I'm sure you guys have done a Google search on who's in your market and you do a little market research. And it's like, do they all have like some doctor in a lab coat or, who's really checking that it's a real doctor? I can just put on a lab coat, take a picture and all of a sudden instantly I'm a doctor, right?
There's
that's where you hear like the FDA and these people go in and kick in people's doors and take over. Like I listened to some guy trying to claim that they were doing $900 million a year in hormone replacement. And I'm like, this is such bullshit. Like I just extrapolated out the numbers. So I'm like, there's not enough fucking people.
Right.
That's like, you probably have 20% of the market, at that. But it was just interesting that this, the group that got busted had never had any actual doctor on medical staff. And it was just a bunch of bros just, I don't know if they were cooking it up in the garage and how they were doing it, but it comes from a compounding pharmaceutical. Obviously the way you guys are doing it. Then I think when you see like that level, it doesn't feel shady, but unfortunately there's shitty people in the market.
Yeah.
Was this company called Balco? That's what it sounds like.
Dude, I'd have to pull the name, but no, the Balco stuff was really interesting because that happened during my NFL career.
Yeah.
And I played against some guys that were in the Balco stable.
Right.
And it was pretty interesting. Like, was it Ozzy Osbourne's song Going Through Changes?
Yeah.
It's always was going through my mind where I saw a dude and then all of a sudden a year later I saw him and I was like, is that the same dude?
Yeah.
So it was pretty remarkable. I just remember being like, man, whatever those dudes are taking, it must be working because these guys look phenomenal.
Right. Yeah. But to answer your question, we obviously keep tabs on our competition, looking for good things that they're doing, but also things that we don't want to be known for. These days, like again, with the onset of COVID, like it catapulted all things telemedicine forward by a decade.
Do people like telemedicine?
The numbers say they do, and I haven't met a person that doesn't.
Okay.
And that's including talking to older folks like my parents and their friends. Because convenience.
Yeah.
It's just so easy.
Old people love to go to the bank. Every time I go to the bank, there's a lot of old people at the bank. And, for the most part, I like to do online banking. Every time I go to the bank to cash a check or get cash or anything, it's always like I see a lot of old people in there.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they trust going to the bank. I wonder if like they trust going to the doctor or did COVID just kind of do a 180 on that? And now all of a sudden that's what everybody's used to.
It kind of forced you, right? And then as soon as you figured out how to do Zoom, which became a household name, like out of nowhere.
Yeah, we should have bought that stock in 2019. Fuck.
But, it just made it the norm. It just made it easy. But like what we see is, care avoidance is very real. Like just go through the steps in your head of getting a doctor's appointment and seeing the doctor. It's a pain in the ass and it's extremely time consuming. So guys more than women are just like, I'm not going to deal with that bullshit. I'm just going to rub some dirt on it and I'll move on. And then eventually, we're 50, 60 years old and we've got conditions that have now become chronic because we never looked at it. But COVID catapulted telemedicine ahead by many, many, many years. And the stats say that today versus pre-COVID, we're still like 35x the number of telemedicine consultations are happening still, even after the country's all opened up. So I think it's here to stay. The fight is not over with, the governing bodies that are going to say like, we're going to make sure that you have to go see a clinician in person before you talk to them about a controlled substance or, any other healthcare interaction. And when you talk to the doctors, they're like, man, if I'm an ortho, like, yeah, I need to like touch you and I need to see if that ACL is torn. Like that's different. But symptoms, seeing somebody face to face, and then blood, like the blood doesn't lie.
Sure.
We think that it needs to become the norm and stay the norm I do. Sorry. Not putting words in your mouth. I could see a day where 60 to 70% of all medical interactions, consultations can be done virtually.
Is the doctors that would be prescribing this, or the doctor that you would go to if you had low T, would be just your GP?
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
Or who is it for most people? Just a PA or?
Less about like their title, but more about what have they gone to school for? What have they trained? What have they stayed up to date with research on?
Yeah. Because
you could roll into your family practitioner, your primary care, and start talking about hormones, and they're just like,
I don't know shit.
I don't know anything about that. Or they'll cite a study that's like 2 to 3 decades old and say, I used to stay away from that stuff.
Well, my son, we go, was it like every 3 months we go to an endocrinologist. And the interesting thing, I think people, and I've run into this through, our programs and the community we work with, have this idea that an endocrinologist is the guy that I'm going to try to look for. And I keep explaining to him, endocrinologists are just looking for pathology. So like you're talking about hormone optimization, he's trying to figure out like, hey, if your testosterone level is high, why is it high? Is it because something's wrong, or your growth hormone level is high? Is it because your pituitary's off? So he's looking for like hormones as an indicator of pathology, not necessarily an optimization. So that's not the dude to go to. I mean, we go to an endocrinologist for the type 1 diabetics, and that guy's job isn't to optimize people with, his stuff is like, this is pathology. These are, things that I'm trying to treat. So I think people like that's kind of off the table. And then you go to a GP who might not be trained, or, you have a guy like Doc Parsley, who's like a 99 level wizard in this stuff because he did it in the SEAL teams and understands it better than anybody. And this is what he does. So
he chose to go deep in that area. I was face to face with a doctor in Dallas about a year ago, and he was peppering me with questions about like, why would I go to you guys? Why can't I just go to my primary care, this, that, and the other? I'm like, well, you should go to anyone who's really deep in this space, who understands it. And he still didn't like that answer. And I repeat this, I feel like weekly now. I made a smart ass comment. I'm like, Doc, if you broke your leg, are you going to a cardiologist? It's like, well, of course not.
You also are dealing with probably the most arrogant people on the planet, which are doctors. And I say that with tongue in cheek because I went to school with some guys that are doctors that I wouldn't pay to cut my lawn. Yeah. So, and then they get this, they get the coat, and there's a little holier than thou deal.
Right.
And so, especially in this, which is kind of an emerging deal, like the doc that when I was saying for my dad, like this is stuff that is clinically not complicated, just takes a little bit of detective work and asking a few questions opposed to maybe 3 minutes.
Right.
I think that's what maybe with the telemedicine, maybe now you have the ability to book and find people that are experts in this.
We do.
Yeah, and you had made a point either earlier or it was probably one of the podcasts I was watching where I think you guys were talking about the proliferation of subspecialists and how it used to have a primary care physician that kind of knew everything.
Yeah.
And then all the subspecialists started popping up. And then before you know it, you're having to get referred to 5, 6, 7, 8 people to get an answer to a simple question. It seems like it's really hard to find a doctor or a clinician that is, one, interested in treating the whole human, but two, has done the hard work, like who's done the research, who's done the study. Because like, this is what I heard from your other podcast. And I think it was Doc saying they don't teach nutrition and they don't teach fitness in med school. It's there's a nail, you're a hammer, do the thing.
Dude, the amount of crazy nutrition advice I've gotten for doctors over the years, everything from high protein diets will kill your kidneys. to carb. I mean, it's to not eat saturated fat because that's going to give you heart disease. I mean, the Ansel Keys study came out in 1959 and they disproved it 6 months later. And then they built all these statins off this model that somehow, there was saturated fat in the food was going to cause all this. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. And like this research has been proven to not exist, and they still do it and they still prescribe it. And then every guy that I know that comes to me, whenever I tell them, I mean, the first thing I get is, I feel like shit. I'm like, are you taking statins? Yes. All right, well, let's get your blood work done. And I guarantee you're going to see that the statins kill your testosterone. Mm-hmm. I mean, because obviously you need, healthy androgen profile. You need things like cholesterol. And why we don't need it through the roof, I mean, without it, you're not going to live a very long life. It's how the cells talk to each other.
Right.
So it's, and they don't always, I don't know. I mean, I've gone on round and round with this with docs so many times. It's like, they're just looking at it like the check engine light went on. So let's figure out why that check engine light's on. It's easier to just put tape over the top as opposed from, diagnosing the car and figuring out why the check engine light is on.
And this could turn into a much deeper debate, but I'm both angry and understanding of the situation that the medical community is in.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
There's not enough of them.
Yeah.
And there's too many sick people to take care of. And then you add payers into this, and they're kind of dictating what those doctors can and can't do if they want to get paid and put food on the table.
Yeah.
So they're forced to have as many 10 to 15 minute consultations on the books, and they have to burn through them as fast as they can. Because like when I was growing up, you looked at doctors or you looked at people that were even able to consume healthcare, and you're like, oh, rich people.
Yeah.
All of them. If you can go to the doctor, you're rich. If you're a doctor, you're rich. It's not the case. Not anymore. Sure, there's some specialists that are like printing money, but for the most part, like being a doctor these days is not nearly as prestigious and not nearly as lucrative as it was. So they're forced to just churn through as many patients as they can. And if they've got it in their head after having a pharmaceutical rep come in and buy everybody lunch, they're like, hey, this is the thing that can solve this problem. So when you hear that, just prescribe that. Mm-hmm. That's what they do. I used to work at a doctor's office. I saw it. And it sucks. I mean, I would like to think that what we're doing is going to make at least like a small dent in the problem, but there's so much more work that's got to be done. I mean, I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, someone needs to burn that system down and start over, because fixing is too hard. It's too bureaucratic. It's even got to the point where it's political, which sucks.
I spoke at a conference on national security about 2 years ago, and one of the guys that was in my group, he's a PhD from India. And his piece was the largest threat to national security was the U.S. dependent on foreign pharmaceuticals. That 70% of the United States takes some form of foreign pharmaceutical that if the boat stopped and didn't come, could effectively cause sickness, illness, and death. Yeah. And like his whole thing was like, and then I asked him, like, how many people in India take that stuff? He's like, no, we don't have a lot of these problems. We just produce it for the people that have the problems. These are like rich people problems. Mm-hmm. Things like obesity and type 2. I mean, these are things that, overabundance.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating to hear his piece. I mean, mine was the largest threat to national security is lack of physical readiness for 16 to 18-year-olds and also 28 to 40-year-olds, which if you look at it, if like something were to happen in this country that required, calling out the militia, it's really just that 28 to 40-year-old age group is by far the most agile, deal. But then also like the volume of Texas hunters is by far like one of the most powerful, or just like hunting, like I think they have like 3 million hunting licenses in like South Carolina alone. In Texas, it's obviously exponential.
Right.
So it's pretty fascinating when you looked at the numbers, but like the lack of physical readiness for those kids, which are really the age that the Army and the militaries are pulling into their future warriors. At that level of like lack of readiness was a huge problem. But this docs deal was crazy. Like when you started pulling out these numbers, you're like, oh my God. And then thinking like, how many people do you know that take multiple drugs? Like my mom's 83, she takes no drugs. She's going to probably live to be 200. I keep telling her if the good die young, she's going to live to be 400. But there's an issue where if you look, I mean, just the amount of prescriptions, like I'm sure you guys go, like I do jujitsu and I got some, something on my neck. Like it was kind of like, I don't know if it was ringworm or what. So I had to go get some lotion or some cream. So I'm in the line. And to see like the cars in front and the amount of prescriptions that cars are getting, like they handed this lady a box and she like dumped her thing, handed the box. And I'm like, man, there must be like 50 prescriptions in that thing. And then I'm like, maybe she's picking them up for somebody. And then the next car came up and they got a bunch of prescriptions.
That's depressing.
Yeah. It's how we're living our lives.
I tend to agree that both of you guys were calling out extremely valid threats to national security. It was a Japanese general, I think, like right before they decided to bomb Pearl Harbor there. I think they were making plans to like invade.
Yeah.
Like there'd be a gun behind every blade of grass.
Yeah,
I think
it's a
was
pretty
what he
famous
said.
quote.
Yeah. But nowadays, like if they just made the general population run or anything that required endurance, like we'd be in trouble.
Or just stop those boats coming.
Yeah.
That was his deal. Like if
Yeah.
you really wanted to cripple America, just stop those boats.
Right.
Which is kind of just a scary thought. But I mean, if, better food, exercise, staying healthier. And I know that's kind of an interesting thing where people are like, oh, I'm trying to stay healthy. And I always ask them, like, what does that mean to you?
Mhm.
Like what is healthy? And, it's, obviously eating less carbs because carbs are evil. I'm like, oh, no, that's not the case. Fat's not evil. Like nothing's evil other than overconsumption,
Right.
but just, I think revamping like what is healthy. I think but like being able to remove the stigma associated with, low testosterone. Cause there's such a interesting play with this like testosterone manliness. And if you're low for a reason, you're not as manly. So obviously if you're supplementing and you're obviously double not as manly.
Right.
And I think there's just a really weird stigma associated to it. And I'm not necessarily sure why, but it's, I'm glad that you guys are tackling this and it looks like a great product. I was also excited when they were talking about the testosterone you guys are using. You went back to trying to find a more,
Less
more
viscous.
aqueous.
Yeah. Less viscous.
Yeah. So that like there's a better upload than that. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, they've probably been, linseed oil or what are they suspended in for the most part?
Cotton seed,
yeah,
grape seed.
seed oils.
Which
Yeah.
it feels like there's probably a better way to be doing this.
Right. I mean, because the ethyl oleate, because I didn't hear what you said at first about the uptake. Like, I don't think we have concrete data about the ethyl oleate and bioavailability and uptake.
No, I don't. And to my knowledge, it doesn't actually increase the bioavailability, but it is much easier to draw up. It shouldn't produce as much of an uncomfortable lump sub-Q.
Mhm.
Well, what's the
It's hypoallergenic.
Right. It is.
So
it should produce less allergies.
the three main types are like a propionate, cypionate, and ethanate. Is kind of the three when if you Google
Right.
types of testosterone.
Right.
And
So
I-
the blend that we are using is a cypionate and nanthate blend.
Okay.
160 milligrams cypionate, 40 milligrams of nanthate, which there is data to demonstrate that produces a more stable level than just cypionate alone.
It feels like industry standards just sip.
So, yep.
That's what everybody
Yeah.
goes.
That's the most
Sip and
common, I
grape
would
seed.
think. Yeah.
So, what's in the future for you guys? Like, what is like 2-5 years down the road? I mean, I know you guys probably have projections in this. Like, what's like the next two big jumps for you guys in the next 5?
Yeah, so we touched on a couple of them just in conversation. To go back to the beginning, we said that our vision is to build this human optimization platform. We started with HRT because it's the hardest thing to build, and it requires us to effectively build a 50-state medical practice, which luckily, 2 of us have done that before, so we knew the, trap doors to avoid and whatnot. But we definitely want to get to a place where we've equipped our clinical team with even more data coming off the human body, and it'll end up being more than blood. The platform that we've built is fully capable of ingesting data from connected devices. So we'll be able to talk about activity levels, sleep quality, sleep duration. We want to get into nutritional supplementation. We'll probably go there first because to your point earlier, the food system and the stuff that we do, lifestyle habits, like we need to start there, but we want to do nutritional coaching. We want to do fitness coaching. We'll get into sleep coaching. And then Uber pipe dream, like way out, is we'll probably have to look at mental health because you can't talk about total optimization if you're not looking at the noggin up there.
Sure. Yeah. Now you're tackling a really interesting one.
Yeah.
But I feel like if, for the most part, at least the people that I've met that have gone on hormone optimization, they feel more stable. Like, I know that's kind of an interesting piece where, somebody's going through some mental issues. Like, I always thought that if you tested them first and figured out, like, hey, let's rule this stuff out. Is it like low testosterone or something messed up? Because I watch when my son's blood sugar gets messed up and, like, it's, he can be, like, all over the place a little bit.
Yeah.
And I can almost spot and know when he's high or low. So now when I meet people, I'm like, man, they seem like they're just low on blood sugar. They probably just need something to eat. Like those commercials, you remember, where the guy, it's like if you're a Snickers and you'd be a lot better person. That's a true deal.
Yeah.
But also I wrote there was an interesting piece of research where they looked at like, where people talk about roid rage. Oh, this guy was they actually found that those people that had anger issues actually had low testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
So in a blog I wrote, I was like, if you ever see a guy that's a complete douchebag asshole, you should feel bad for him because he has low T, and you should probably help him out and help him because for the most part, they thought that people that had higher testosterone levels were much more stable and easier to deal with.
We see it too.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have dealt with people and you're like, God damn, get this guy on something. He's fucking painful.
Yeah. And on the other extreme, I think there's some truth behind people that are abusing anabolic steroids and they're doing doses that are, 10x what is it, a physiologic dose or something.
Yeah, super
that we would
physiological. What effects? Like I'm always fascinated because like you see these bodybuilders like just up and die, and it's usually like cardiac arrest or something happens. But I mean, there's probably a lot more of these guys. Like this is kind of an interesting observation. I used to train with these pro bodybuilders back in the day. And their whole deal was that the guys at like the mid levels in bodybuilding took dramatically more drugs than the guys at the top, because the guys at the top were just genetic freaks that were super responders.
Got it.
And there was no way to like drug yourself to that level. So it was like the dudes in the middle that were the guys that were taking just obscene amounts of drugs. But when they started talking about the amounts, you're kind of like, wait a minute. Like how, like, do you even have enough injection sites for that? And they're just dumping all this shit in their body trying to have an effect. Mm-hmm. And I always wonder, like, what are the, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of the long-term effects for those guys, just because none of those dudes do or any regular blood work or. Right. Just
I think I'm not certainly not an expert at when, the mechanisms of when things go wrong, what's actually happening. But I think I've seen a trend, or at least it looks like there's a trend where a lot of them die or pass of heart failure due to cardiomyopathy, or fatal arrhythmias due to cardiomyopathy. The heart is just getting bigger and unstable.
Is that athlete's heart where the heart just exponentially grows in size?
Well, there's ways to get there. It can be congenital, or it can be from exercise induced, carrying too much weight, and then of course steroids. But eventually it becomes a big heart that doesn't work well.
Is there obviously you're thinking about anabolic steroids. I mean, in terms of like striated versus smooth muscle. I mean, the heart being kind of smooth, it's kind of interesting that it would tend to grow. But most of those guys end up dying in some weird cardiac arrest.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
But I'm no expert in that field. But yeah, it's what happens to them. The things they put in their body are very different than what we're trying to build. So.
Louis Simmons told me years ago that powerlifters take more drugs than bodybuilders, but bodybuilders die more because of the weight fluctuations and the low body fat and putting themselves through, and like the lack of salt and all the deprivation stuff they do. He thought that was harder on the system, and that's why those guys keeled over and
Makes
died.
sense. And the other additional chemicals they would have to use to cut the fat.
Like clenbuterol and all the thyroid medications and all the things that they take.
Makes sense.
Yeah, he thought that was a bigger indicator.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so it's you're kind of playing Russian roulette if you do it and you don't go get tested and you don't work with somebody reputable. Going down, I always tell you, dude, if you're buying your stuff from some dude who's like, "What's up, bro? Here it is," you fucking probably need to readjust your life a little bit.
Yeah.
And go find some professionals. And what's great and why I was really excited about you guys. I mean, because I shit you not, dude. We've been approached by a ton of this stuff, but every time I look at it, I'm like, it feels a little dirty. And just the collection site for blood, it's so simple. Like I looked at it, was like, fuck, this is great. Like, how come nobody did this?
Right.
And so I was stoked to see you guys coming on and doing it. So it seems pretty good. So if you guys want to get a hold of you, Wellcore.
TeamWellcore.com.
Okay. And on social?
I think, what do we say, social guy? Everything's Team Wellcore.
Team Wellcore.
Right on.
Well, cool. We'll drop it in the show notes, and I know we got some discount codes and a few things popping out. Hopefully we can drive a little bit your way and start getting some really good user-generated content and some great reviews.
That sounds great. Thanks for helping us spread the word.
Dude, thanks for coming on.
This was fun. Appreciate that.
Appreciate it. See you. Thanks for tuning in. Another episode of Power Athlete Radio. See you.